Our New York studio. And Tal, that summit's going to be closely watched, certainly there in the U.S., but as we noted, elsewhere, especially in Europe.
Right, correct, Kalev. Very much here in the U.S., as we know, everything that involves President Trump and the Russians is highly watched, highly scrutinized from every direction, with the Mueller investigation, of course, in the background, but more so in Europe. European leaders, the European Union, and also NATO allies, they will be watching the developments around this summit very closely. European leaders are somewhat united in many cases against Russia. They're trying to put pressure on President Putin due to Russia's destabilizing military activities in Ukraine, in Syria, and of course old Russian attempts, as we know, to try to break certain European alliances. So President Trump, he unnecessarily lines up with this united European stance against Russia, as we saw just recently, a few weeks ago, for example, ahead of the G7 summit in Quebec in Canada, when President Trump said that he believes that Putin, that Russia should be back as part of this group, and that is in defiance of all other people in the G7 summit that think that Russia should stay out of it, as it was expelled over its engagement in Crimea. And as we know, as you mentioned, Trump will also travel to Brussels before he will meet with President Putin. He will be heavily criticized if over there with U.S. allies in NATO, he will use his very famous anti-NATO rhetoric that started back on the campaign trail and be tough on them. And on the other hand, then goes to meet Putin in Helsinki and be easy and welcoming with him. So that's another point to watch.
Tyler, it's not even just Americans or European leaders, those NATO officials that are going to be watching closely. Certainly right here in the Middle East, a lot of eyes on that summit, because that's going to be one of the major issues they talk about.
Of course, first and foremost, the latest developments in the Syrian civil war. President Bashar al-Assad's forces are continuing to make their assault to the military advances with the ongoing assault on southwestern Syria, the area of Daura and Quneitra. And this will be heavily discussed as well between President Putin and Trump, because we know that the U.S. State Department has issued a warning to President Assad, warned of repercussions in case he makes such military advances. The U.S. also urged the Russians to try and restrain Assad in this region. Not only that Assad is making these military advances now, the Russians are also, they seem to be cooperating and helping Assad to gain back this region in defiance of the U.S. warnings. And of course, Iran, Nurit Kalev, will be another issue on the table. There's a report that came out today in London, in the London-based newspaper Al Hayat, that said that President Trump is likely to urge Putin to promote Iranian exit from Syria completely. And in the case that the Russians are able to guarantee this, a full Iranian exit from Syria, then the U.S. might be more willing to discuss further options in Syria. That includes an ongoing continuation of the Assad regime in Syria.
Right, and that report in a Saudi-linked newspaper. So they have some clear reasons for saying that President Trump will ask for full Iranian pullout out of Syria, but might be